Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for stopping by. Today I bring you another hour of twisted stories for your listening pleasure. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. In 2005, my mother had to be in London for an interview. My mum and dad took the train to make a day of it, with the interview being held in the afternoon. They got the early morning train to London, went shopping and had some lunch. By the time my mother's interview had finished, it was pretty late, and they had a choice to catch the subway and make a run for the last train home, which would get them home around silly o'clock in the morning, or stay in London overnight and catch a subway outside of King's Cross, then back on the subway to the first thing in the morning. My folks aren't spring chickens by any means, I'll have you know. They were on the subway at King's Cross, and my mum turned to my dad and said that she had a very strange feeling. My dad wanted to know exactly what she meant, and she proceeded to say, "If something happened underground, would we get out?" My father is an ex-military man and has seen many things in his life. "Doubtful," he said. "You'd have to be very lucky to get out alive." My mother then said, "So if a bomb went off?" My father replied, "You'd be screwed. Nothing more, nothing less. You'd need to be very, very lucky and count your lucky stars if you got out alive." My folks are very happy, quiet, go-lucky, positive people, and don't often speak of things like that. They got to the stop where they could get a hotel and stay the night, or walk to the train station to get the train home. My mother expressed to my father that she was feeling pretty weird, and so my dad said, "Let's just go." They ran for the train and made it just as it was getting ready to leave. My folks woke up safe and sound that morning in their beds, switched on the TV to horrifying news. The subway that they were on, and the subway that they would have been getting on that morning, if they hadn't have come home, had just been bombed by terrorists. The day, 7th of July, 2005. This story happened almost 11 years ago, late summer of 2006. I was an 18-year-old freshman in college. I went to a tiny college at the opposite end of the state. I lived in the basement ground floor of an old dorm, and my floor was a men-only floor. In my dorm, there was a communal bathroom for all 20 guys to share. 2 stalls, 2 urinals, and 2 showers. That's it. One of the showers had an air vent that was about 7 feet up, but on the outside it came out about ground level. Well, one hot summer's day, I'm taking a shower and just talking and joking with the guy in the next shower behind me, and all of a sudden I hear someone else talking to me. I think, okay, maybe someone has come into the bathroom and wants to use the shower or something. That thought quickly leaves my head as I realize that the air vent has been opened and the dorm's maintenance man, i.e. the janitor, is now looking at me through the vent. This guy was easily in his 50s and looked like the actor Clint Howard. He had a thick Appalachian accent. He somehow knew my name, although I never remember giving it to him. He was just trying to small talk. It was very weird. I mean, I was weirded out by the college janitor peeping on me and then trying to start a conversation whilst I was showering. But for some reason at the time, it didn't really register that what he was doing was super creepy and illegal. I just thought he was being weird, and I politely asked him to close the vent. The guy in the shower next to me quipped that the janitor did it all the time, and that he thought it was weird and creepy too. but ultimately harmless. They joked that the best time to shower was late at night, lest the pervy janitor tried watching and starting a conversation. It was apparently a common occurrence on my floor, and my floor was mostly made up of the freshman football players. And I guess the janitor just liked talking to these guys about the team and football through the air vent whilst watching them naked. I would see the janitor occasionally around the dorm, but I never experienced him spying on us again. I never told the resident life or college administration about the janitor doing these creepy things. This was in August or September 2006, so way past the time I could try and do anything. I hope maybe someone spoke up one day, and maybe he was fired, but who knows. Around 8 years ago when I was 14, I went on holiday to France with my friends and her parents. We were staying at the Euro Disney Resort, so we didn't have much contact with the outside world whilst we were there. On the third day though, we decided to go to a nearby shopping centre called Val d'Europe. This place was massive to a pair of 14-year-old girls. There were so many different shops that my friend and I tried to go in, and decided to sit around the benches rather than continue shopping with my friend's mother as we were tired. That was when I first noticed two men in their mid-40s eyeing up me and my friend. They were both quite large, bearded men of possibly Middle Eastern or Algerian descent, whilst we were still, and are, freckled Irish girls. Me with red hair and green eyes, and my friend with blonde hair and blue eyes. I started to get uncomfortable almost instantly, while my friend thought that I was imagining things. I could see the men whispering and staring at us, and they started getting closer and closer, eventually sitting in the area where we were in. At this point I asked my friend if we could move to the next set of benches. As we leave, the men start to follow, confirming my suspicions. I'm getting pissed off as I can see them planning something, as they are now blatantly following and staring us. Being in a foreign country, I was even more on edge and didn't even know my surroundings or speak French that well. So I knew I was helpless if anything happened. Anyway, this went on for another 20 minutes or so, then following as we moved away. I had enough and was really freaked out, so we went to find my mum and told her what was happening. Meanwhile, they had followed us to the shop and noticed who we were talking to. We thought that would be the end of it, but they actually went up to my friend's mother and asked her for information about us and if they could take us out. Needless to say, she was more assertive than we could be, and they backed off. I clung to my friend's mother for the rest of the time there, but they still followed us around from shop to shop until we left. While they never actually laid a finger on us or spoke directly to us, the idea of what their intentions were with two 14-year-old girls still freaks me out. I recognize what I'm about to say is going to upset a lot of people. I'm not here to offend anyone. I've just reached a point where I can no longer hold this in. There really is nobody I'm close enough to. Nobody that would hear what I have to say and not put it against me. I've been living life from day to day, carrying a burden that has nearly driven me to the point of suicide. It doesn't matter what I do, how much I try and scour out the bad choices left decaying in my past. It's that same burden that stalks me every day. When I get to work, when I'm hanging out with my friends, it never, ever goes away. The images begin to flood my mind, and suddenly I can picture her face all over again. Always the same tears, the same expression of fear that was burnt across her innocent face. I can't hold her face anymore. I can't keep going on like this. I'm telling you this in the hopes that the possibility of putting my story out to the world, I may be able to free myself from some of the guilt. Before we proceed any further, you should know that I'm not a good person. Don't get me wrong, I try to be, I really do, but part of me is convinced that the life I live right now will never make up for who I was and what I've done. You may come away from this hating me, and for that, I can't blame you. I spent a good part of my life as a neo-Nazi. While a lot of guys I hung out with were doing it for the trend, I saw that life as something more. I was part of something that I really believed in. It was religion, my religion. At one time, the German people had recreated a section of the world in their own image. I saw Hitler as a prophet, sent to the Aryan people to lead them into a fresh era of power and prosperity. I thought Hitler held a vision, but they killed him before he could realize it. I considered myself one of the chosen many entrusted with a flame that we could take out into the world. We could finish what our great leader had started generations ago. I know now that all of this was bullshit. We were all just oblivious cogs inside of an obsolete machine. We were young then. We were furious, angry, and we felt like outcasts. Angry that this world didn't understand us, and more importantly, it didn't even try. We were all products of broken families, abandonment, abuse. We all felt alone out there, exposed. My parents had just gotten a divorce. The split was sudden and sharp. I was 13 at the time, yet I couldn't realize why they did it. The sole thing that made it abundantly clear was that my mother insisted that I would live with her. My father agreed to the arrangement without putting up the slightest hint of protest at the idea. That part hurt. It hurt bad. I always was close to my father, closer than my mother and I could ever dream of being. I held nothing against my mother. My father and I just always seemed to click. I guess we were so much alike. But it turns out that that could not have been further from the truth. With the exclusions of a few brief visits stretched out over the years, I'd never seen my father, at least not enough of him for it to mean anything. I carried on my life from that point under the assumption that my mother had somehow been the cause of everything. I didn't know why she'd pulled our family apart. I just knew that I resented her for it. I'd find out years afterwards that the reason behind my parents' divorce wasn't as much my mother's as it was my father's infidelity. He had been screwing this girl behind my mum's back for about a year. I saw that nasty bitch once when I spent Christmas over with the old man. Perky blonde and stupid. I determined that my mother's obvious replacement was barely out of high school. The whore introduced herself as my father's friend. Even then it didn't take long for my teenage mind to put two and two together. It was a revelation that only made me withdraw further into myself. Every day I had to look at that thing. I watched her wander around the house in her tight t-shirts and laced panties. She never saw it as inappropriate, dancing around the house half naked whilst her boyfriend's teenage son was visiting for a week. She just kept on doing that. Either way, she was oblivious to the inappropriate nature of her actions, or she simply didn't care. Either one of those explanations would have changed the fact that I felt like I was being constantly disrespected, and all of it falling under my father's apathetic watch. He may have been the king of the castle, but in the end, it wouldn't be him calling the shots. Rather, everything that happened in that house was dictated by a ditzy piece of barely legal arse. And what disgusted me the most was that he would make a point of indulging himself in it daily. Whilst my father kept his flirtatious gestures toned down in the beginning, he'd eventually get comfortable enough to start repeatedly articulating his unfiltered appreciation for all things jailbait. She'd grin, and he'd slap her on the arse. It would be moments like these that constantly seemed to happen within my proximity. I tried to dismiss it, act like their interactions were not driving me mad on a daily basis. While my father saw a walking sex doll, all I could envision was that whore was what he chose over mum. 2 days before I went home, my father began hounding at me to go do something outside the house, to sweeten the pot. He even gave me $40 and recommended that I catch a movie at the theatre across town. I knew what he was going to do, and I knew that he was intending to do it with her. I heard them through the walls nearly every night. They were so loud that I would have to cover my ears with a pillow to get some sleep. Apparently, screwing after dark wasn't enough for my dear old man. Apparently, he was in the mood for a midday snack. I reluctantly agreed and took the bribe money. I had only been outside the house for a few minutes when I suddenly felt compelled to go back in. I returned to the front door, only to find that it had been locked. I raced around the house only to find the same with the back door, with no traditional way back in. I improvised by climbing through the guest room window. I learned very quickly that it wasn't my sounds that mattered, rather the sounds that were occurring from my father's bedroom. Loud, wet gagging, as if someone was being choked from behind the threshold that was cracked open just a few feet ahead of me. As I proceeded forward, the sounds would become more and more acute. Strange, disturbing gurgles that carried across the hall. These were the sounds that continued to befuddle me, right until I slowly pushed the door open enough for me to peek through. I was speechless from what I saw. My father's girlfriend was laying on her spinal column, while he forcefully ground her face from an upward angle. At that point, I wasn't a stranger to sex. By then I had learnt the basics along with a few extra notes I'd picked up from other kids in the neighbourhood. But what I was seeing, however, didn't fall into any of those classes. The exchange had been proceeding on long enough to cause the girlfriend's makeup to start oozing onto the bedsheets beside her. She cringed, she gagged, but she never stopped, nor did she let my father know how uncomfortable she was. She simply lay there in complete submission. As mad as I had seen my father in prior days, I couldn't help but feel a little pang of admiration for what I was seeing. He was punishing her, and she deserved every minute of it. The explicit moment would last for about another 10 uncontrollable minutes, before my father ended with a scream that resounded throughout the empty house. As soon as my father collapsed in exhaustion, I kept watching as the girlfriend slowly gathered herself, quickly placed a hand over her smeared mouth, and kept any of my father from spilling out as she proceeded to get off the bed, taking a few disjointed steps into the adjoining bathroom. That night, all I could think about would be what I watched in that bedroom. It took me hours to get to sleep. The next morning I awakened to find my father had left early to get an oil changed before taking me back home that afternoon. As I walked through the house, I detected that my father had gone alone. The TV was playing in the living room on the couch, and there lay the girlfriend passed out, wearing her usual attire. I attempted to get her attention, but she didn't even move. I must have stared at her for 15 minutes, every second spent thinking how my father punished her, how she deserved everything she received. I wanted to practice what my father did. I wanted to punish her too. I foolishly convinced myself that I would practice what I envisioned, and she wouldn't try to stop me. I crawled on top of her snoring body and positioned myself like I'd seen earlier. She opened her eyes right as I began to fidget with my zipper. She said nothing in those first few seconds. Once it all finally set in, she let out a scream that hurt my ears before pushing me off to the floor. She then quickly dashed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. When my father got home, I knew that he would burst into my room shortly after. It all happened faster than I even thought it would. He kicked my ass like I was simply another guy off the street. When all was said and done, he threw me a towel, gave me enough money for a bus ticket, then ordered me to get the hell out of his house. He never told my mother why he sent me to get the bus. He never told her why he abruptly decided to cut the visits from Blue Moon down to almost non-existent. I couldn't have cared less. As far as I was concerned, my father was dead. Nobody gave a shit about me, and I wouldn't give a shit about them. I soon became the epitome of adolescent delinquency. It was during that time that I was approached by a skinhead at a skate park. They were throwing a party and inviting kids from around the neighborhood. I decided to go, and my life changed forever. I could tell right away the people I belonged to. We were the orphans of society, but we were also the descendants of proud people. A proud race. A pure race. When you feel small and marginalized, of course your ears are going to perk up when someone says that you're better than the majority of people out there, simply because you were born with a genetic lottery ticket. Prior to joining, I never considered myself racist. I actually didn't even know anyone who was black or Jewish. Most people in my town were white, so something like that never even crossed my head. In the end, it was never about those we went after. It was about being part of something. I finally had a family of my own. My mother went off me when she found out how I was spending my time away from home. She told me that she refused to let a neo-Nazi sleep under her roof. I didn't argue. I went away. I ended up moving in with one of my friends, Torch. We both felt so accomplished and motivated. We felt as if we were unbeatable. My life continued on that track for years to come. I intimidated people. I offended people. I did whatever was required of me. It was a vicious cycle that would go on before suddenly derailing the moment I saw that video. You're probably questioning how a video could suddenly change a person's opinion overnight. I can tell you now, with no exaggeration, that my opinion didn't just change. Every fiber of my being changed. And it didn't occur overnight. It happened as soon as I turned off my computer. I couldn't sleep that night. So I got on the net and started cruising the usual white power websites and messaging boards. I couldn't find anything to keep my interest, so that's when I decided to boot up Tor and hit the deep web for something that I could sink my teeth into. The site installed Promised Lands. It was a deep web message board dedicated to all things controversially white power related. The sites that people can find on the surface web are light to say the least. The government set about cracking down on anything that could be considered extremist behaviour. When that happened, people took off heading to the dark web, where nobody could censor what they decided to say or do. The most extreme thing I had ever seen on Promised Land was the video of some guy dragging the dead body of a dark man behind their truck. There was no way of telling if the man was dead before they set out dragging him, or after. I'll be the first to say that I'm not proud that I watched that, but the truth is the truth. The video segmented was usually cluttered recorded lectures, how-to weapon footage, and the occasional Aryan Barbie doing a striptease. The lineup was different that night. The top-rated video had siphoned the majority of the user votes. The title was Uncle Adolf's Wonderful Puppet Show. The comments were insane. The people writing them seemed overly stirred up for some reason. Some of the people demanded more videos like it, whilst others explained in particular how they couldn't watch the whole thing. The chatter just made me more curious. I downloaded the MP4 and clicked play. I wish I could take that back. The video was distorted, jumpy. The footage looked like it had been shot almost a decade ago. Everyone around the camera spoke fluent German, was talking to a beautiful short-haired woman with a roguish grin on her face. They seemed to be inside some sort of warehouse or mill. The woman lured the cameraman over down a flight of rusted spiral stairs, and they continued talking to each other as they worked their way down a seemingly endless number of steps. The further they go, the more we start to pick up noises. It sounded like it was coming from a bunch of people. The footage jumps forward. The woman was now sitting next to a cameraman, running her mouth as he zoomed in and away of her attractively rounded face. The two were sitting inside of an auditorium, old yet maintained. The interior looked as if it was made for theatre production, and the auditorium was filled with other chatty Germans. The footage jumped forward again, only now everyone in the auditorium was standing. They all hail Hitler, whilst another aged anthem played through the old speakers that were wired through the auditorium. The anthem concluded, and everyone sat down. The lights began to dim just as the stage curtain started to function. Everyone began clapping. We get to see what's on stage. Stationed at the center is a large metal replica of Adolf Hitler sitting down in a chair. The giant Adolf has to be at least 15 feet tall. There are regions of the figure that have rusted, even some of the paint had begun to crack, exposing the sharp-looking metal behind his grinning face. While Metal Hitler's left arm was resting, the right was positioned straight up. Likewise, unlike the left, the right arm didn't end with a hand, rather a mesh of jagged metal barbs. If you looked closely, you could ascertain the right arm was connected to a jumble of thick wires that extended from the Metal Hitler all the way to a complicated looking electrical box. The old metal inside of Hitler began to churn and click. Hitler's eyes started flashing as it spoke a series of German idioms. The voice was old and muffled, distorted, like the kind you hear through a fast food drive. A man appeared on stage. He's dressed like a circus ringmaster. The only major adjustment to his outfit is his large swastika sewn onto his top hat. He's pushing a big box on wheels. The cube is covered with a black tarp that is quickly withdrawn when the man comes to a stop. Underneath the tarp isn't a box, it's a cage. Inside there's a woman curled in the fetal position. She's of African lineage. Her clothes were in shreds, and she looked like she'd been physically abused recently. The louder she cried, the more the audience cheered. More men came up on stage. They opened the cage and forcefully removed the woman from her prison. While they struggled to draw her out, a strange-looking contraption began to lower from above the curtain, stopping just above the raised Hitler arm. This creation was formed of mostly metal, with a series of leather straps located at four ends. The men hoisted the woman up onto the contraption despite her protest. They yet managed to strap her in. She hollered, she begged. They only laughed at her though. At this point, the audio in the video would become drowned out by the animalistic screams of the audience. The contraption started up one more time. It lowered the screaming woman onto the upper side of the jagged metal. The powerful hydraulics pushed her down into the razor-sharp metal, like a human eraser onto a pencil. The sounds she made were indescribable. The farther down she was pushed, the more blood flowed down the mechanical Hitler arm. After a few minutes, the woman would give out from shock. The audience started booing loudly. The ringmaster assured them that there was still more to come, and he looked at a man standing near the electrical box. He nodded, and the man pulled a lever down. Sparks flew from the box as electricity rapidly travelled through the box, all the way through the metal arm that bore into the woman. Her body began to jolt uncontrollably whilst her teeth chattered so loud you could pick up the sound as well as the audience. The mechanical Hitler started to act and talk as this was going on. Moments later, the applause would be deafening. After that, the video stopped, and it disappeared from the forum for a few days afterwards. Not that it mattered. I'm sure it's still floating around somewhere. Right now, some sicko is probably watching it. Me? I left all of that behind. All I can tell you now is I try to keep the pieces together. As for those of you out there who think that hate empowers you, let it go. Just let it die. You have no clue what real hate is. Real hate creeps through your blood like venom. It's a blackness that invades every inch of your body until it ultimately gets its claws around your heart. Once real hate has gotten its fill of you, it leaves behind a withered husk of something that couldn't even be called a human being. I've seen real hate, and I've spent every day since wishing that I had not. My mum and dad were having a house party. I can't remember what for now. It was a good few years ago. My family from other parts of the UK had come to visit for the party, and a few were staying in the house. My mum's sister, Janet, was staying with us and was upstairs getting ready, whilst my mum and I were making sandwiches and other food ready for everyone to arrive, whilst also talking to her other sister Laura in the kitchen. Auntie Janet came storming down the stairs, hair still a little wet, hairbrush waving around, and marched right up to my mum's face and still waving her hairbrush and now saying at my mum, "I said, I'll be ready as quick as I can." Mum asked what she was talking about. You standing there looking at me in the mirror. I said 3 times to you, I'll be down as soon as I can. It's really creepy. My mum stayed calm. No one's upstairs but you, Janet. I've been here cooking with Laura and my daughter the whole time. The two of us nodded in agreement, telling Janet the truth. Mum had been in the kitchen the whole time. She even had her oven mitts on from taking things out and adding more things to the oven. Now looking as white as a sheet and shaking, my auntie told us how a lady, looking almost exactly like my mum, was staring at her, standing behind her, looking at her through the mirror. My auntie turned her hairdryer off, not taking her eyes off the mirror, and said, "Give me a minute." The lady walked away and started going down the stairs. My auntie drove the 2 hours home that night, not wanting to stay at my parents' house. This story happened to me when I was 7. I'm 18 now. So my mother and I, my mother being a single mother, decided to travel to Paris from Finland to see Disneyland and the city itself. Disneyland was amazing, and I loved every second of it. But even though we had 2 days left at the park, my mother insisted that 2 days before we left, we spent it doing a few more cultural activities, which I personally wasn't too keen on, but she insisted. So we left Disneyland that day to visit the most famous sites in the city: the Louvre, the Arch, the grave of the unknown soldier, the Versailles, even though it's not really in Paris, and of course the Eiffel Tower. We saved the tower for last. I kept looking at my watch thinking that we may just have time to go on a few rides later that day. When we got to the tower itself, I insisted on looking around various small souvenir carriages. I ran off to look at the stands without my mum, and after about 15 or 20 minutes of looking around different versions of the same Eiffel Tower keychain, I noticed that she was nowhere to be found. Initially, I wasn't too shaken up, since I'm sure my mother was sitting somewhere keeping an eye on me in the way she always did. I decided to walk a few more stands closer to the tower itself, and after a few minutes, I did a 360 look around to try and see if I could locate where she was, but to no avail. At this point I had started to panic. Being a tiny Finnish boy in a foreign country, and with no understanding of French and barely any English, I grew only more anxious and scared of my situation. This is where the story gets creepy. Whilst walking around aimlessly and scared, trying to find my mother, I see a tall guy staring right at me, maybe 20 meters away, doing the finger gesture, suggesting for me to come closer to him. I was quite creeped out and decided to turn around and walk away. Perhaps I'd be able to locate my mother. The next set of consequences I will never forget, and have possibly been the scariest moments of my life. From nowhere, I see a long dark shadow in the ground, and I get a very uneasy feeling from the bottom of my stomach. I turn around to see the same guy standing behind me, with a huge grin on his face. He then proceeds to say something in French, but I stand there paralyzed by fear. He then says something to me in English, with a very thick accent. "Follow me, little blonde boy." Now, like I said, I didn't really speak English at the time, but from watching plenty of American cartoons and movies with subtitles, I understood that. The man tries to reach out for me, but I start running from my life. I kept screaming for my mother, when out of nowhere, she appears, the man still running towards me as I run into her arms. My mother quickly asks me if I'm alright and what happened. I hastily explain my encounter and we both turn around so that I can point him out to her. But the man has literally vanished into thin air. The thing is, when he confronted me, we were nowhere near any buildings or vendor carriages, and the tourist crowds weren't awfully large either. After comforting me for a minute, my mum explained to me that she had to go buy a bottle of water from a vendor, and had tried looking for me afterwards. Safe to say, my mother stayed by my side for the rest of the trip, and didn't let me out of her sight again. I had several years to rethink the whole situation I was in. I still think to this day that I could have possibly been kidnapped. I can't help but wonder if those were his intentions or not. Maybe this man saw me, walking aimlessly for minutes trying to find my mother. But then again, who knows? I may have wound up in a completely different situation if I hadn't have run when I did. Nevertheless, this incident has easily been the creepiest encounter of my whole life. I have been working night shifts at a hospital for 7 years now. and I have had quite a few stories. There was one time I came into work one night. Jen, one of the nurses, told me that my other co-worker Jay had the creepiest thing happen to him a few hours prior. A patient had passed away in one of the rooms abruptly, so the room was cleaned and was quickly occupied by another patient who had coded and was pronounced dead, but was then resuscitated. Soon after being admitted in his room, he complained to the nurse, "I can't be in here. This man won't stop looking at me. He's really worried about his dog. His dog doesn't know that he's dead." She had assumed that he was just seeing things, and said, "Oh yeah? What does he look like?" He described the deceased patient perfectly. I could see the chills running down her spine as she was telling us the story. It turns out that the man did have a dog as well. The new admission was moved to another room. Jay said, "I don't believe in ghosts. They aren't real. I want to see it. Tonight I'm going to provoke it so that it can show itself." 3 a.m. rolls around, and the three of us are at the nursing station. Jay starts playing YouTube videos of various puppy sounds. Soon after, 2 lift team guys come up. We forget what we were doing, close the video, and start another conversation. Suddenly, we all hear it, except for Jay. A dog barking in the same room, loudly and clear as ever. The lift team guys say, "Does anyone have a dog in here?" Jen and I simultaneously shit ourselves. I used to make a living off the dark web. I guess the correct way to phrase it was that I made a living off people's fear from the dark web. Allow me to explain. I ran a fairly popular YouTube channel. The sole purpose of said channel was to stoke the fire that led people to believe that the dark web was this ominous landscape of dread. You know what I'm talking about. My channel was no different from that of hundreds of others out there. I would rack up thousands of views from me filming myself browsing the deep web whilst playing into the notion that I could stumble onto something sinister at any moment. I never did though. The truth was, the whole thing was a scam. Not the kind of scam that legitimately ruined people's lives or anything, but every video I recorded was rehearsed beforehand. I knew where the journey would take me before I even pressed record. My usual process involved hours of browsing until I found a few sites or threads that I could milk for at least a couple of episodes. Most of my uploads were 2-parters. Human trafficking, government conspiracies, satanic cults. All of it was bullshit. Just fearbait to get people to hit the subscribe button and click on my videos. People used to sit around campfires and tell ghost stories. Ghost stories gave way to urban legends. The deep web is just a modern continuation of our society's obsession over the bogeyman. The sites that I visited in my videos never yielded any truly terrifying results. If I thought that a site was too boring, I'd sometimes blur out a couple of photos on the page to give more credence to the illusion. Even the supposed deep web. You might be wondering how I could keep something like this up for so long without viewers eventually dropping off the map. It's the same reason people watch the stupid ghost hunting shows. Nothing ever happens, but people continue to watch because they're teased that something might be lurking around the corner. What started off as a way to keep myself occupied during multiple bouts of insomnia became a pretty lucrative enterprise. So successful that I was able to quit my day job and make YouTube content full time. On the surface, my videos conjured up creepy explorations of the hidden internet. But what my fans did not know was that my private browsing sessions were absolutely dull. Don't get me wrong, the deep web isn't a stroll down Sesame Street. It's a minefield of child porn and illegal goods. But once you get past those things, it's pretty much the same as the normal internet, only not as organized. All of this started with a private message from another YouTube user. I was nearly done editing a video involving some random page detailing cannibalistic recipes. The whole thing had actually been debunked as a hoax a few months earlier. But, like so many other entries, I knew that if I made things creepy enough, I could pull another one over my viewers. I got an alert on my phone that I had received the message just a few minutes after I had already checked and responded to the prior message. And for the sake of the sender's anonymity, I will just say that her name is Jane Doe. The message was as follows: "Please forgive the random message, but I've exhausted all my other options. My name is Jane Doe, and I've been watching your videos for some time now. You seem to have a genuine understanding of the internet, more importantly, the controversial aspects of it. 4 years ago, my 5-year-old son was abducted during a local Halloween parade. I had only taken my eyes off him for a few minutes before my husband and I even realized he was missing. The police were unable to find any clues in my son's disappearance. There were no suspects, no motives, nothing. It was, to quote a local detective, as if he disappeared into thin air. The investigation continued without yielding any solid results. We finally had him legally declared dead in an effort to secure closure for myself and my family. Time passed, and I had gotten to an emotional point where I could start putting this horrible tragedy behind us. That was until 2 weeks ago, when I got a strange email in my inbox. The subject said, "See, Mum? All smiles." As soon as I read it, I knew. I just knew it had something to do with my little boy. And it did. Inside the email was an attached picture of my son. No text, just the single picture. I took the picture to the police. The email it was sent from was some kind of dummy address. They had someone analyze the picture itself. They told me something called metadata that allowed them to figure out when the picture was taken. They estimated it was sometime at the beginning of the year. And that's just the thing. I don't see how it could be possible. In the picture, he looked like he hadn't aged a day. And it's been 4 years. He'd be at least 9 by now. And I just don't understand. As before, the police have hit a dead end. They can't tell me where the picture was taken from or who sent it. Like I said, I've watched your videos. I know you haven't done anything about missing children, but I was hoping that if there was some way that you could help, some way, any way. If it's about money, I could pay you, so that you know I'm serious. I sent a copy of the picture to the email listed on your channel. Please try and look if you're able to spare a moment. Thank you for your time. Jane." I checked my email, and what I found sent a chill down my spine. The picture attached was indeed that of a 5-year-old boy, but something seemed wrong, off. I couldn't put my finger on it though. The little boy was dressed in a navy blue three-piece suit. He was sitting in a fancy-looking chair with his legs crossed. But it was his expression that bothered me. His eyes were wide open as he grinned abnormally for the camera. I would check my email randomly throughout the following days. I probably stared at that picture on and off for days. It got to the point where I even began to dream about it. Finally, I took it upon myself to do some research about the photo. I put the picture through a Google image search and got nothing back. Then I logged into Tor and did the same thing through a basic deep web search engine. My results led me to a single unlisted page. The header title read, "Little Darlings." Beneath the title were the words, "Where all your childhood dreams come true." The background of the simply designed page was layered with tiny images of matched paper dolls. No amount of mental preparation could have readied me for what I saw next, because within seconds, I felt like an invisible hand had reached into my chest and it began to squeeze my heart as if it were a stress ball. It was an embedded video that said, "Our process." The video was distorted. It started with a simple block of text that read, "Gwen, age 6, blonde, Caucasian, no blemishes, darling value, high." The video glitched to show a very large framed clown leading a young girl into a small windowless room. The little girl wore a tattered white gown stained with dozens of dark spots that could have been food or even blood. She woozily wobbled back and forth in an attempt to move forward. Text appeared over the footage. A muscle relaxant is administered orally to the subject 2 hours prior. As the two made their way to the center of the room, you could see that the only visible piece of furniture was a single fraying couch pushed against the wall next to a raggedy door coated in peeling white paint. The little girl walked aimlessly with a blank expression towards the couch, where the hulking clown instructed her to sit down. Once the girl became positioned on the couch, the clown pulled a deflated balloon from his pocket and began to blow it up. My stomach started to knot up. I was sure the video was about to show the clown molesting the little girl, or at least something disgustingly similar. I turned my head to avert my eyes from what I thought was soon to come. After a few minutes, I turned back to the screen to see the clown putting the finishing touches on an inflated poodle. I readied my finger on the mouse so that I could quickly escape the page once things took a turn for the worse. And things did get worse. Much worse. But not in a way I could have expected. After completing the animal balloon, the clown handed it to the little girl, whose eyes lit up as bright as they could considering the current state she was in. As her tiny arms slowly outstretched to receive the gift, I watched in the background as the white door to the right of her slowly creaked open to reveal a thin individual wearing what looked like a painter's jumpsuit, the kind that you would buy from Home Depot. The cheap outfit was complemented by a blue surgical mask that obscured the figure's face from the nose down. Quietly, swiftly, the masked figure made his way from the door to the little girl. Just as she took hold of the poodle, the figure produced a syringe and injected the girl in the back of the neck. She began to seize for a few moments before going completely limp. The video quickly jumped to the footage of the girl laid out on some metal table. Her clothes had been removed. The masked figure then proceeded to peel her skin off with an object resembling a scalpel. I started to gag as the twisted images shifted to the girl's detached skin being carefully fitted over a pre-posed plaster mold. The footage jumped forward yet again to show the faceless individual adding a wig, then makeup to the human taxidermy experiment. The final result was an eerie replica of the little girl sitting eagerly at the foot of the bed, placed as the centerpiece of a well-decorated bedroom. The dozens of photos displayed as I scrolled down were just as twisted. Multiple children posed in multiple settings like a clothing catalogue. Next to every child was a price tag, ranging in the high thousands. The girls were more expensive than the boys, and the white children seemed to be rarer and more expensive than other ethnicities. It wasn't until somewhere around the 10th photo that I noticed what had been disturbing me about them. It was the eyes. All of the children's eyes had been replaced with hollow glass imitations. In the weeks since I visited the site, I can still see those same eyes staring back at me every time I close my own. I haven't made or uploaded a video since I stumbled onto Little Darlings. I don't even know how I can go back to doing what I used to do. I haven't even responded to the woman's message. How could I? What could I say that wouldn't send her into a deeper fit of despair? No, I think it's too much. As we may crave the truth, there are some things in this world that we should remain shielded from. In closing, I'm not going to tell you to stay off the dark web. All I'll say is this: I've lost my faith in humanity, and if you saw what I've seen, you would lose yours as well. My mother is a teacher in a small elementary school. At the time, she taught first grade, and right after school, instead of riding the bus, I would go to her classroom. I always found that there was one janitor that just seemed off. He would stare at all the kids and yelled at them when they were in the hall alone to watch out for strangers. Nobody got a good vibe from him, and he had the creepiest, dead eyes that looked like he was trying to look into your soul. My friend's mother was also a teacher, so me and her sister would often hang out. One day, her youngest sister, who was in kindergarten at the time, went to use the bathroom, and when she came back she said something that drained the colour from all our faces. The creepy guy asked if anyone was in the stall. She promptly replied with yes, and despite the fact that she replied, he immediately twisted the lock and opened the door. We rationalised that maybe he didn't hear her. He always did stuff like it and it creeped us all out, but we thought he was just a creep. A few months later, we found out he was being transferred to a new school, and that was a relief. Years went by without anything strange happening, until I noticed cops outside every entrance of this school. I asked my mum why they were there, that Stevie the janitor was caught sneaking into the girls' locker room and attempting to rape the two girls that were changing. When he was arrested, he said that he would kill the principal and the superintendent, as well as anyone who got him fired. So that's why the cops were there, to protect everyone at the school. So creepy janitor guy, let's not meet again. This story takes place on a magical holiday. Me and my family had gone to Disneyland to celebrate my parents' anniversary. We went on Friday and stayed in this cute hotel and explored the park. Saturday afternoon, we had just eaten pizza and continued walking in the park. There was a labyrinth as an attraction, themed Alice in Wonderland. My sister was still pretty young, and she stayed with my parents and my uncle. As I was 14, I went ahead. There were loads of people all following the same direction, so it was easy to know where to go to find the exit. There were a few corners and turns here and there, but almost no one went in them. I'm walking way ahead of my family now, and I can't see them anymore, and they can't see me either, when suddenly, a woman appears before me. She's small, has dark tinted skin, and she starts following me, and then talking to me. First she speaks English, but at the time I could only speak a little English. She sees I don't understand, so switches to German, French, and then Spanish. Now I can speak Spanish, and happy to finally be able to understand her, I reply, "See?" So she tells me that she knows the way out. I'm hesitating. There's something really off with the way she keeps smiling at me. It's a weird smile. And she keeps looking around anxiously. But I'm also curious, so I ask her which way. She gestures behind me, to a completely empty part of the labyrinth. And when I try to say that we should maybe just follow the people, and that my family is somewhere behind me, and start backing away, she moves quickly, grabs my arm and starts pulling me with her. I'm struggling, she's strong, and she says that she knows a better route, a shorter one. My mum appears around the corner, so I jerk myself free, and throw myself into her arms. The woman then mumbles something and quickly walks away in the opposite direction that she was pulling me. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened with me had my mum not appeared the second that she did, and had the woman been able to drag me with her. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Just a heads up. This Saturday I'm going to be live streaming in the afternoon, so if you can come and join the fun, it would be amazing. I'd love to see some of you awesome people there. Remember that if you want to share a story, you just need to submit it as a text post on my Reddit page or send it to me via email. Both links can be found in the description. And if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to not miss your daily dose of horror. And if you would like to do something truly amazing today to support the channel, you now can via Patreon, and you can find the link in the description, as well as the links to my social media. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.